Hi everyone, in this video we will be practicing paraphrasing and nominalization. When you see this symbol on your screen, please pause the video and analyze the sentences. After you have finished analyzing, you can resume the video. Let's get started. Let's start with the definition of paraphrasing. What it means is that you need to rewrite a specific passage from someone else. You are required to use your own words. While doing this, you shouldn't change the original meaning and you shouldn't remove any information. In other words, you need to explain a statement or remark in another way in order to clarify the meaning. A good example of paraphrasing is, let's say you ask someone a question. What does emerge mean? And when someone defines this word and says it means to appear or come out from somewhere, this person is actually paraphrasing it. To be more specific, a paraphrase is your own interpretation of essential information and ideas expressed by someone else, presented in a new form. We will talk about what I mean by new form. And one of the appropriate ways to borrow from a source when accompanied by accurate documentation. You will need paraphrasing a lot in academic writing. Remember, being able to paraphrase shows that you clearly understand what the statement means. Why do we need to paraphrase? Why is it so important? You need to gain the necessary language skills to rewrite sentences by using a variety of appropriate language forms in order to answer certain comprehension questions in reading and listening. This question is taken from reading strategies. The question says, what problem does the writer mention in paragraph 8? And the first part of the paragraph is given here. It is not a good idea to copy the sentences from the paragraph and answer the question. You need to get the correct answer from the text and write it in your answer. You will focus on the problem here and you will write losing motivation. This is a simple example of how we need to use paraphrasing skills in comprehension questions. You will also need paraphrasing skills in order to fill in information gap questions. This practice is also taken from reading strategies, and as you can see, the sentences provided here are the paraphrase versions of the sentences in the reading text. In order to answer information gap questions, you need to find the relevant information in the reading text and fill in the gaps accordingly. Similar to information gap questions, paraphrasing plays an important role in true-false questions. In this example, all the sentences are the paraphrase versions of the sentences in the reading text. So, in order to understand and answer this type of question, you need to have paraphrasing skills. Finally, we need paraphrasing skills to summarize information from listening and reading so that we can produce our own sentences and paragraphs. For example, this short text is taken from Language Leader coursebook, and the practice asks us to summarize the points. In an activity like this, you will need to use your paraphrasing skills. Similarly, you will need paraphrasing skills for the listening texts. When you are taking notes, you can't just write all the words and ideas from a listening text. And when you are taking notes, you need to paraphrase. You will take notes and write down the important points to produce your own sentences. So far, we have had ideas about why we need paraphrasing. Now, let's talk about how to paraphrase. You can rewrite a sentence by keeping to the original meaning as closely as possible. Although there might be slight shifts in emphasis and focus, the meaning will be similar. So, don't worry about it. What are some ways to paraphrase? It could be changing the word order from active to passive or vice versa, combining two or more sentences, using synonyms and antonyms, and finally, nominalization, We will talk about the last one in more detail later. In order to understand how to paraphrase better, let's study some examples together. By the way, do not forget the pause symbol I told you about earlier. Now, let's have a look at the main source and the paraphrase. The first phrase, the latter half of the 19th century to present, can be rewritten with the word since, and the latter half of the 19th century will mean 1850s. In addition to this, what the writer did in this sentence is to change the structure from active to passive. Also, there are words that we can use to talk about purpose, such as in order to, and so that. And the writer used so that plus sentence structure to give similar meaning. Finally, pay attention to the words dominion and land. The writer used synonyms and wrote control instead of dominion and territory instead of land. Now, give yourself a minute to analyze the sentences. What the writer did in this sentence is to change the structure from active to passive. Also, pay attention to the words underlined. In the main source, we see when it is suffering from stress or injury, but in the paraphrase versions, we see when the body is subjected to stress and injury. As you can see, it is possible to change the structure, the word order, and it is possible to use synonyms to paraphrase the sentences. And the last example that we will focus on is this sentence. Pause the video and analyze it first. It is clear that in the first paraphrase sentence, the writer used the purpose as a noun instead of the verb aim. Also, the phrase without altering was rewritten with the verb without interfering with to give similar meaning. This was done with the verb not to change in the second sentence. Finally, pay attention to their way of life in the main source and the lifestyles in the paraphrased versions. Now, let's talk about some tips that can be helpful. We can also paraphrase sentences using prepositional phrases. We can use prepositional phrases with nouns, noun phrases, or gerunds. To introduce a reason, instead of as, since, because, we can use because of, due to, and owing to, and they are used with nouns, noun phrases, or gerunds. This is the first sentence. Look at the first sentence now. We have this dependent clause because the language is constantly changing. With prepositional phrases, we can paraphrase it. Look how the writer rewrote the part with the dependent clause and used prepositional phrases instead. You can also use these prepositional phrases after the independent clause, and this will not change the meaning. The example is given here. Okay, we just talked about the prepositional phrases that introduce a reason. Now, let's look at the adverb clauses of concession. These are despite and in spite of, and similar to the ones that introduce a reason, despite and in spite of are used with nouns, noun phrases, and gerunds. Now, look at the following sentences. You know that a dependent clause is used after although, even though, and though. What the writer did here is to use despite and in spite of with nouns, noun phrases, and gerunds. Finally, in this video, I'll be talking about nominalization. Here, you make a noun or noun phrase from a clause, verb, or adjective. To understand it better, let's read some examples and see how the language and form change while the meaning in the sentence remains almost the same. Pause the video and give yourself some time to analyze the sentences. This example is from verb to noun. In the first sentence, the writer used prevent as a verb. In the paraphrase sentences, the writer used prevention, the noun form of the verb, to get the similar meaning. Also, pay attention to the verb used in the first sentence, and in the third paraphrase sentence, look at the noun form of the use. This is called nominalization. Another example is with the verb create. Please look at the sentences. To paraphrase the sentence, the writer used the noun form of the verb create. The following two examples will focus on noun to verb. The word manufacture in the first sentence is used as a noun. What the writer did here in the paraphrase sentences is to change the word from noun to verb. Also, pay attention to the use of although in the first sentence and despite in the paraphrased first sentence. Now, look at the last example and give yourself some time to analyze the sentences. Similar to manufacture in the previous sentence, the first sentence includes the word use as a noun. However, in the paraphrase sentences, the word is used as a verb. Before I finish the video, I'll be giving you some tips to practice nominalization. First, when you are studying with a dictionary, don't just look at the word you are interested in. Look at the other forms and note them down too. For example, this is from Oxford Online Dictionary. I looked up the word prevent and it provided me with the other forms. As you can see, preventable as the adjective and prevention as the noun. Secondly, learn the collocations. When I searched the word creation on the Oxford Online Dictionary, it provided me with the collocation and example sentences. When you are studying, make sure you also write down the collocations. Now it's your turn. Go talk to class to do the tasks. Good luck, everybody.